So what we want to do now that we have all of our petal forms is we want to start constructing the basis of the flower. And to do this, we are going to be using hot glue. And so you're going to take the first two of your large petals, and I'm going to apply a little bit of hot glue here at the base. I'm going to take a second petal, and I'm just going to overlap it slightly. And kind of get an idea of the overlap there, and you can kind of play around that as you continue to construct them. Get a few extra. It's always good to have your extra glue sticks at the ready. You will likely be going through a few of them today. Once you've connected those first two petals, go ahead, add a little bit more hot glue on there, and we're going to move on to petal number 3. Again, overlapping it just slightly. Add new glue stick into my gun. We've got 2 more petals to go, so go ahead, continue to add some glue at that base. Add in the 4th of your large petals, again, just overlapping it slightly. And you can start to see our flower base forming here. And then we're going to add a little bit more hot glue for our final of the 5 large petals. Doesn't take a lot of hot glue, you just want to make sure that there's enough there to hold it securely. It goes without saying, hot glue is hot, so please just be mindful. Usually a little scalding on the fingertips is inevitable. And once you've got those 5 petals together, you can kind of see we've started to form this cup shape that really forms a lovely outer ring of our petal, or of our flower. So now we're going to start moving on to our medium size. And for these, typically what I will do is I will hold the petal in my hand, apply a little of the hot glue to the underside of it, and I will press it down into the center, sort of positioning it more or less between 2 of the larger petals. You want to create a little bit of variation in the patterning of your petals as you're placing them into the interior.
Robert, do you find that hot glue is the best thing, or really any type of glue?
Well, you know what? I have tried it with standard white craft glue, which obviously dries a little bit slower, and it doesn't have the same immediate hold. So I often find, especially when I'm working with the heavier weight cover stock paper, that I've had the best results with the hot glue. It just has that immediate hold and dries so very quickly. Hot glue guns are really inexpensive and are also another thing that you really should always have in your craft toolkit. Okay, we're going to go ahead then and place our second one in. And you can see I'm spacing it out just a little bit further than I had on the previous one. Holding it there just for a second, allowing that glue to set. And I was just telling JKO it sets up very quickly, which is why it's ideal for this type of project. And then we'll move on to our 3rd of the medium-sized petals. And stick that down in the center, give it a little hold.
Robert, I learned something recently about hot glue.
Tell me.
Sometimes you'll find that, I noticed this says high temp.
Yes.
And you can find there is just like regular and high temp, there's a difference. And when I was asking somebody, if you were doing this, say, for a wedding and it was going to sit in your car in Arizona, it might kind of fall apart if it's not a high temp heat
that is such
glue.
a good tip.
Do you know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about? Because
absolutely.
it would take a lot to really melt this down.
Right.
But if you have a low temp one that's usually made for kids, so that it's a little safer,
Right.
Your project may tend to fall apart in the heat of your car.
That's such a good tip. And a lot of the most basic glue guns will come as the hot, but if you get some of the little bit more advanced ones, they'll have a little switch for the low and the hot. So that's a really good tip. That's a good thing to know.
And it comes down, I think, to what the glue is, as far as how it manages the craft stays together.
I agree.
Later,
I agree. All right, friends, we're down to the final 3. We're going to stick those in now. And again, we're just going to position those between our medium petals, kind of filling out the interior of our flower. Really good tip though about the hot glue, Kathy, because you think about it, you go to all of this work to put together a project like this, the last thing you want to do is have it fall apart on you.
Or if you're like at a show and it's a really hot day.
That would be the worst.
And arms start falling off your
Yeah,
dolls
absolutely.
or whatever.
That's the last thing you want to have happen. So once we've done that, we have formed the basis of our flower. Now there are a couple of ways we want to finish it off. Obviously, we want to put a stamen in the center of the flower to kind of create that contrasting pop in the middle. And to do that, we are using text weight paper. Text weight is a lighter weight than your cover stock. I've taken an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper and cut it in half vertically. If you want to go ahead and just fold each of those in half vertically as well. And what I'm going to be pulling out next is one of my favorite little craft gizmos. You may or may not have come across these in the past, but they are the multi-blade scissor, which I think are just kind of genius. They have multiple blades. They're used for fringing. And what we're going to do is on the folded edge of this piece of paper, we're going to start at one end, and we are going to cut it about 3/4 of the way down. You can see how deep I've cut there, just about 3/4 of the way through the paper to create that fringe. And you're going to do this with both of your sheets. I originally discovered these in an organization store, and they were sold and marketed as a tool for shredding your credit cards. But I immediately saw paper application, so they're much more accessible now, and you can usually find them at most craft and hobby stores. I know you ladies in the audience are sharing a pair, so I'm going to pass this off as soon as I finish. There we go. Hand that off to you. Okay. Once you have fringed your pieces all the way down to the end, to give it a little bit of added dimension, we're going to open it back up and we're going to fold it in the opposite direction. And that just kind of makes it balloon out a little bit. Fold it in the opposite direction. Don't press that crease shut. Just allow that to kind of balloon out a bit. I'm going to match up the corners on this one, and I'm going to put a couple of staples in it. And I'm going to do that with both of those. So again, opening it up, folding it in the opposite direction, not folding that crease flat, allowing it to balloon out, giving it a little extra dimension, and then adding a couple of staples at the end. All right, I know you ladies are still cutting, but I am going to continue on with this next step. I am just going to take a standard pencil at my stapled end of the sheet, and I'm going to start rolling it around. And one thing you want to be mindful of when you're doing this, you're just going to do your best to try and keep the paper on the bottom edge lined up. The pencil is really useful just to kind of get this rolling process started. You may find that it gets in the way and you can just remove it. I'm going to continue rolling all the way down. You will find the paper shifts a tiny bit so that you end up with one flap on the end that is extended a little bit beyond the other, but that's totally fine. And when you get to the end, I'm going to add a little bit of hot glue there to secure it in place. I'm going to do that with both of the sheets. And because you're working on a little bit more intimate scale here, you don't necessarily want to burn your fingers. You might want to consider just taking the eraser end of your pencil and pressing that down for a second, allowing it to cool. And you can see what this starts to do is create a little bit of a pom-pom looking stamen for our center. Now, this is a little small for the flower, which is why we've created two sheets. I want to make it a little bit wider to kind of fill out that central space. And so what I'm going to do is add a little bit additional hot glue here and start my second sheet. I'm going to just overlap it there and start rolling that around. Again, trying to be somewhat mindful of keeping the edges of the paper lined up along this bottom edge. We want that to be fairly even only because we're going to be applying hot glue to that and then pressing it down into the center of our flower, and we want it to sit relatively flat. Now once I get all the way around to the end, I'm again going to apply just a little bit of hot glue to secure that. It's like I need one more glue stick in there. Okay. Folding that over, and then again, just sort of pressing down with the eraser end of the pencil to avoid burning your finger. You'll find a little bit of the glue will inevitably seep out the side. Don't worry about it. It's not going to be visible necessarily in your final product. So I'm holding it there just for a second. How are we doing with the rolling, ladies? It can be a little tricky and take a little practice. I've had some of them where I've rolled it halfway through and it's gotten away from me and sprung back open like a little bit of a spring. But at that point, you just start over again and keep rolling. So at this point, I've got it where it's pretty secure. This is what the top of it looks like. You might just kind of want to take your hand and fluff the top of that up a little bit to make it feel a little fuller. I've seen these flowers done completely monochromatic where the stamen and the petals are the same color, which is beautiful. You can also play around with a wider color palette if you choose a contrasting color for the center. And then to apply it into the middle, I'm going to hold it with the flat bottom side up, and I'm just going to apply a generous amount of hot glue on the top. And then very carefully place it in the center. I usually try and position it right over the staples of that last petal to kind of disguise them a little bit. And then just hold it in place for just a second. I find that if you just drop it in there and immediately remove your hand, it can have the tendency to tip over or dry at an odd angle. So if you just hold it in place for a second, it should be good.